grants. Those operational grants that are on this call have probably seen it all. And if you haven't, I'm sure that you will if you stay within the program. And I am surprised every day by the scenarios that come across our desks. It's just so crazy. And so we tried to put together, the three of us, some scenarios that we've seen. And these are pretty tame, to be honest, based on other things that we've seen. But I would, and I know that Sasha and Kim would, love for folks to like pipe up if you've seen something like this, what you did. I know that sometimes we don't always make the right decisions, or we don't know what tools we have. And then we learn, hindsight is 2020. But this is a safe space for this kind of discussion. No, there's no, no one's getting penalized if they made a decision that wasn't necessarily. It's just all about coaching, and let's work together to make sure that the members, get their education award, get their living allowance, but also at the same time, we're following all the terms and conditions, which I know can seem like a lot. So I'm going to start us off by going over the agenda real quick. So we're going to talk about commitment, timesheets, not getting it done, communication, emergencies, benefits, conflict, room for compromise, sexual harassment, exits for cause, and then how did we get here? So like a myriad of scenarios, and we're just going to go through them. Just as a reminder, AmeriCorps members are individuals who are enrolled for a specific term of service, and a term of service, is minimum time to a full time. And to go even further than that, their term of service is based on their contractual dates in their member service agreement. So if you're saying that a member has to do 1,700 hours between September 1st and August 31st, that's their term of service. They are not, and this is really an important distinguish, they're not volunteer staff, employees, or interns. And I know that we all know that, and sometimes we use verbiage that is kind of contrary to that, but keeping that in mind when we're talking about these different scenarios, you wouldn't necessarily treat an AmeriCorps member the same as you would an employee. So just keeping that in mind. This is on Basecamp. Christina and I put this together. It's all about member management. It's basically kind of a roadmap to all the things members related, and everything's hyperlinked. We'll make sure it's updated for this year. But these are all the things you have to think about when you're enrolling your member, enrolling to exit, basically. So setting up your payroll, the member file checklist, what you need to have on file, AmeriCorps set up their timesheets, doing mid-year reviews or reporting. So we just try to create this map to navigate the life cycle of an AmeriCorps member. We know it doesn't always fit in this box, but hopefully this roadmap is helpful for at least one program or one person. And then obviously the order and precedence of the guiding documents. Sasha went over this yesterday, the more general to the more specific. And then the specific terms and conditions, reference members. Certain sections mention them more than others. They're very, prescriptive. They have to have an MSA. They have to be enrolled before their criminal history check has to be done. Very prescriptive rules about how to enroll members and how to exit them and what should be happening during their term of service. Let me just go. This is new and this I think will be really helpful for everybody during the year. It's on Litmus, and it's a developing policies and procedures for AmeriCorps state programs, and it goes through people ask us this all the time, what policies do I have to have? And it goes through all the policies an AmeriCorps program has to have. And then there's some that we say that are good to have, like a payroll, or like if a member leaves within a week of a payroll period, a living allowance policy is basically what I'm trying to say. So this we'll put on Basecamp. It's just a workbook. You don't have to go through the whole workbook and do every single activity, but it does help you think about what does your policy look like at your organization, and how do you make that member friendly. I'm gonna pass it to Sasha. Uh-oh, you're muted. Always, right?
Thank you, Sam. This is something I've never heard of before. So we're going to go ahead and start moving into our scenarios. We have quite a bit of time for this session, so I really want to encourage you all to be engaged. We're going to be asking if you've run into these scenarios, how you've handled them, and also going to try to pause to see if you have other tips, other policies, other resources that are helpful to handling these different situations. So really encouraging everyone to be active in the chat, to unmute yourself and speak out if you have something to share. So that is how we're going to run this bit of the session. The first scenario we're going to look at is commitment issues, members not completing their hours. So our scenario that we're going to work with is a member has been selected, enrolled, and has signed an MSA for a minimum time slot during the summer. Their term of service is set to be June 1st through August 31st, so about 3 months. And the number of hours they need to complete their term on time is 25 hours per week. On July 1st, so a month into their term, a third of the way into their term, you realize that the member has only been doing 10 hours per week. What do you do? Everyone go ahead and go into the chat. Have you had this situation come up? I know some of you have. I've already seen it with a couple of programs. Who's encountered this in your programs?
This literally happens in every single program. Okay, I see nodding heads.
Yeah, Michelle, with a half-time member, yeah, sometimes those lesser time slots can be a little bit tricky, absolutely. People don't realize, it doesn't sound like a lot of hours, but they don't realize that they really need to keep on track still. Yeah, summer positions, again, when you have those kind of shorter time periods, shorter time slots, it can get tricky. Dana, yes, time for meeting with member and supervisor. Great. So let's go ahead and start talking about solutions. First thing to think about in terms of prevention and in terms of management is who's approving timesheets? When are they being approved? You want to make sure that your approvers are really aware of what the hourly expectations are for each of these members and that they're able to keep track of that when they're approving timesheets. And it can be easy to have this get out of control. Maybe every week you notice they're, maybe an hour or two below where they should be, but that will build up over the course of a term and can put you in a really sticky situation. So it's really important that your timesheet approvers know the minimum number of hours that your members should be working and that they're following up if members aren't meeting those expectations. Check-in calls. So who is responsible for meeting with the member and ensuring that they're achieving their goals? Depending on your program design, this could be the supervisor, it could be one of your program directors, it could be another staff person with your program, but you want to know who's responsible for keeping members on track, so that that person can be paying really good attention to this and catching the situation before we're a third of the way into the term. This is where that resource that I shared yesterday during the timesheet session can be really helpful, that member hours year to date, because that will do all of the calculations for you as long as their timesheets have been approved appropriately. It'll run the numbers for you, tell you what their current average per week is, what their needed average per week is, and if they need to catch up, it'll tell you what the hours needed to catch up are. So that's a really valuable tool. Absolutely encourage you to run that report at least quarterly. Honestly, depending on your program design, more often might be warranted. Member service agreement. The member signed a contract. That contract should have in it what the term is and what the minimum hours per week are. Do you need to revisit this? It's really important to make sure that members understand when they are signing the contract what's in it. When you start service, you are getting a ton of paperwork thrown at you, and not everyone is going to read every bit of it. So it's really important during your onboarding process that you are taking the time to go over the MSA in depth and make sure that you're drawing members' attention to these expectations for their weekly minimum. And then setting smart goals. Once you're in this situation, once you have a member who is way, way behind, it's really important to be intentional and smart about what you're going to do going forward. You need to have a conversation first about whether it is possible for the member to catch up. If they signed on for 25 hours per week, what's the maximum it's going to be reasonable to expect from them? That member probably isn't available to do 40 hours per week, even if that's what they need to catch up. So you need to have a really honest and open conversation with the member about the situation in which you find yourselves and about the options available to you. And depending on the situation, it might mean that they continue serving for the living allowance, but ultimately don't finish their term and don't receive the education award. It could mean that they need to do an early exit and then they can try again at another point in time. Or it might mean that they are able to up their hours a little bit, catch up, and get back on track to finish their term. So let me see. I see a lot of activity in the chat. Let's see what everyone is saying in there. Um, yeah, Annie's saying that they've seen this more recently with their full-time members as well. So this is really a problem that we can see across the board. Yes, Dana, love the idea of having a written improvement plan with a fixed by date. Having those clear milestones, those clear expectations that everyone is signing off on is so important. You don't want to have just kind of a vague conversation about like, oh yeah, you need to up your hours. You want to have really the clear expectation of these are the hours you should be working. This is the milestone you need to be hitting, and make sure that everyone is in understanding and in agreement with that. Kelly, yeah, you've run into this, and continue to follow up with the member and supervisor. Yes, absolutely. You want the supervisors to be your partners and making sure that the member is staying on track. Having that dual point of contact can be really important. Oh, and you're saying that you've created an Excel calculator so members can calculate the hours needed each week as of a certain date. That is fantastic. And if you're willing to share that tool, I would love to see that so we can maybe make it available to other programs. That sounds like it would be really valuable to have available. Christy, yeah, schedule a meeting to tell them what's been observed, tell them what they're supposed to do, make a schedule to help them catch up, and ask them to commit. You definitely want to keep tabs on them going forward. But you're right, it's ultimately up to the member to decide whether or not they're able to commit to increasing their hours and catching back up. It absolutely happens that sometimes members sign on and they don't realize what the commitment was, or they just, weren't really prepared to take on a term of service, and they've realized that AmeriCorps just isn't the right fit for them at this point. So at the end of the day, it's up to members whether or not they're going to catch up. Let me see what else is in the chat. And then, yeah, Christy talking about reports you can run in Encore that shows the hours saved, pending, and completed. That sounds really helpful. Definitely do some clicking around in Encore to see what's available there. Anyone else have anything to add about this scenario in which a member isn't completing their hours? I love the engagement we've gotten already. Okay, we can go ahead and move on then. Samantha, next slide. Thank you.
Can you see the slide? It says prohibited activities.
We can see it, yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Pass it to Kim.
Great. Okay, so prohibited activities. A member serving a local community center has been filling out their timesheets dutifully and meeting their site's expectations. This member is an example of a high-achieving member. They usually volunteer to lead projects and communicate regularly with their supervisor. You, the program director, are approving timesheets and see that the member was doing a service project at a church. They used the description section to detail all their activities during the service project and included a story about talking with a pastor and youth group present that day. You had already spoken with the host site about the project and determined that it was an allowable service activity. But the timesheet narrative could be interpreted as a prohibited activity. Next slide. And this actually happens quite a bit. So be specific. This is one of the things that you can do to help rectify this issue. Be more specific with members about filling out timesheets. It's always very good to do this. Use your best practice. As a best practice, you can use have drop-down menus. A lot of times we've told programs to use that in place of having members enter a bunch of data into their timesheets. It's much easier for them, and it should be actionable to what their service is, because you have filled out that piece there, and all they have to do is drop down. For offsite, you must use the description, but service projects tells us what it is. Timesheets are official records, and we have to remember that. Anyone can come behind us years from now and look at that and make a determination that it could be a prohibited activity. And that's anyone like us, the commission, an AmeriCorps monitor, and even the OIG. So you have to take a look at that a little differently and really pay attention to those timesheets and how members are entering them.
Everyone knows that that's our policy, right? That offsite has to have a description. I think that a lot of programs are, when you guys are training your members on timesheets, saying like, these are the service activities, they go back to your position description, choose one, if you're tutoring or mentoring, whatever you're doing. And then the service site, if they serve multiple service sites, or you'll have a drop down for where they are serving, if they're already, an encore attached to that service site. We're just not looking for long narratives. Because you may not be here next year to explain it away when we do monitoring. And then like Kim said, obviously the OIG can come behind us at any point in time and disallow hours because they're perceived as prohibited. Do they have to include a description of the activity? No. So that's the kind of the whole point of using the drop down, is the drop down. So if you have a position description and here are your main 5 activities, then you can use those activities in the drop down, and they don't need a description because it already tells us what it is. And if we want to know what it is, we can go back to the position description. They match. Cool.
Yep.
All right. So more timesheet issues. Like this is the last timesheet issue. A member's been serving in your program for 6 months.
Hey,
They've
Samantha.
Oh, yeah.
The slide didn't change. Sorry.
That's all right. I can reshare it.
Didn't want you to get too far into that when we can't see it. There we go.
So you can see it now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. So member has been serving in your program for 6 months. They've done their timesheets sporadically. So they're missing some weeks, they're filling out others. For a period of service of 6 months, they've only completed about 5 pay periods, and they're bi-monthly timesheets. They're not weekly, they're bi-monthly. So they should have 12 pay periods filled out, but they only have 5. So I don't know if I've seen like where it's sporadic, but I know members are, sometimes they don't fill out timesheets, right, for a couple months. And that's a huge problem. So I believe in some of your MSAs, it says if you are serving 0 hours, then you should be suspended and you shouldn't receive a living allowance. And we don't see that happening in the field. So we're kind of confused where if we're doing a timesheet audit and we see, let's say it's June, and the member hasn't filled out a timesheet since April, it's like, what's going on here? Like, what's the disconnect? And so we would ask for documentation about, what corrective actions you've taken with that member. So just some pieces of advice here. When are you checking timesheet compliance? If you're the program director, you know that you've set up the timesheets for bi-weekly approvals. And so if you're not approving, and I understand if you have a core of 20, 30 members, sometimes those few members might fall through the cracks. But just doing, Sasha said quarterly, for bigger programs, even monthly, just running a report to see if members have been completing their hours. You can see ones that are not started. That's a drop-down menu in Encore. So that's an important tool to use. And then obviously your supervisors are your partners, right? So why you can just email, so-and-so Gene Smith hasn't submitted a timesheet in 3 months. Number one, are they in active service or are they AWOL? What's going on here? Disciplinary action. So what's your policy? What is contained within your handbook and the MSA? If members aren't submitting timesheets, which means that technically if these are grant records, then we have no proof that they've even served. If they're serving 0 hours, then they shouldn't be receiving a living allowance because technically they're not in active service. Even though you see them, let's say next year we do an audit and they don't have any timesheets, but you paid them a living allowance from April to June, we're going to disallow that because there's no evidence that this member was even in service if there's no grant record. Suspension. So what are the implications of paying a living allowance to a member who does not have documented time entered? First of all, that's not equitable, right? Like to your other members who are doing everything they're supposed to be doing according to their MSA, and you're letting this member get away with not submitting timesheets and you're still giving them their benefits. I would put that member in immediate suspension until they do all their timesheets. I mean, it's just not fair, right? And you might have a practice where you document things, you know, first offense, second offense, third offense, or written, verbal, that kind of thing. But timesheets are grand records and they need to be filled out, and they're the basis. They're literally the basis for members getting their education award. So they need to be completed. I know this happens literally everywhere. Do we have maybe best practices on how to get members back on track, or any disciplinary things that your organization has taken, or things that you've done to, I mean, you're kind of a rock in the hard place, right? You want to motivate them to do what they need to do, but at the same time, you can't allow this to happen. So I'm wondering. Paper checks don't receive until timesheet shows service. Interesting. We used to do paper checks when I was a program director, and it was like so tedious. So we just went to direct deposit, but that's an interesting idea.
We do direct deposit, but we have to communicate with our HR department, and we verify every time that we have a timesheet from every person before the direct deposit runs, and they'll hold it if we don't have timesheet.
So they will
we start,
hold it. Okay.
they'll hold it, yeah. And we start sending messages to members a few days before saying like, hey, if we don't have this, your pay is gonna get held. It's gonna get held. It's gonna get held. We've only actually this year had to hold it once, but usually just that reminder is enough to get people in long in time.
Yeah, they want to get paid. They got bills to pay.
Yeah, exactly. I would want to get paid.
We just have to fill out 2 weeks of time. Sure. Anybody else? I know that I think a program on here, when they have their check-in calls and they see that members are not filling out timesheets, will like literally, and I'll do this sometimes too. Let's just do it right now. Let's just like get it done right now. You know? Next. Do you see it? Did it change?
Yes, it did change.
Okay.
Sorry, I was looking for my mute button. So communication, are you AWOL? Go ahead and already put in the chat. Have you had members go AWOL? And how have you dealt with that? Because that's a really hard situation to be in. So while y'all are putting in the chat, I'm going to go ahead with our scenario. It is a member's 10th month of their 12-month term of service. The site supervisor contacts you and says they have not heard from the member in 2 weeks and they have not been showing up for service at the school. So what can we look at here? We call it ghosting. Yep, thanks, Adia. So first thing you're going to want to look at is your site agreement. What does it say about reporting member absences? I understand I ran into this when I was working with Vista. Sometimes I think site supervisors can be reluctant to kind of escalate an issue. You know, they don't want to get members in trouble, especially if it's maybe been a member who has been performing well for the rest of the year, or if it's a member who is who has, you know, they know they have maybe some health issues, some mental health issues. They know there might be valid reasons for them to be away. But it's really important for you as the program to know as soon as a member goes missing, because as Samantha was just saying, you know, you don't want to be giving benefits and living allowance to someone who isn't showing up. And also because it can be a safety concern. You know, you might be the only kind of point of contact, the only touch point for that member. And if there's something serious going on health-wise or another emergency, you need to be aware of that so that you can make sure the appropriate people are aware. So make sure your site agreements have a policy on how quickly the site needs to inform you if a member isn't showing up and what steps you're going to take. After you have heard from the site supervisor, the first thing you're going to want to look at is contacting the member. Have you tried to get in touch with the member? If email isn't catching their attention, then hopefully you have a phone number for them. Hopefully you have a personal phone number for them, not just a work phone number. And if you still aren't able to get in touch with them through email, through calling, through personal personal calls or personal texts, then it's really important to make sure that you have an emergency contact for your members. Because again, we hope this never happens, and it's pretty rare, but if there is a genuine emergency and they don't have anyone looking out for them, you can be that person to get emergency services involved and make sure that they have the help that they need. And sometimes maybe you'll get in touch with the emergency contact and they'll be like, oh yeah, the member is out of country on vacation or something else wild happened. And that's going to inform how you move forward with the situation. Suspension. So suspension is really one of the very early steps that you're going to look at if a member has gone AWOL and you're not able to get in contact with them. Because again, they shouldn't be receiving their benefits. They shouldn't be receiving their living allowance while you aren't able to contact them and while they aren't showing up. So you're going to want to look at what your handbook and your member service agreements say about the time not served. You're going to want to look at the member's schedule. Is it maybe normal for them to have a little bit more of a sporadic service schedule, or are they someone who previously have been showing up very consistently on a consistent schedule? And what is your policy about time requested off? What kind of prior notice do you require? And how are people supposed to get in touch if they need emergency time off? You want to make sure that all of those things are clear to the members and to the supervisors. And once you have covered all of those bases, you're probably going to want to think about putting the member on suspension while you look into what exactly is going on. And then living allowance. Again, have you been paying a living allowance for the time period that the member isn't reporting to service? This is especially important if it's gone past a pay period. What does that mean for the program and for the members? That can mean disallowances. It could mean, the member having disciplinary action. And it can turn into a mess pretty quickly if you have members who are getting paid without showing up. So let's go to the chat. I see some action in there. Let's see what everyone else has to share. Yeah, audio. We call it ghosting. Exactly. That is our modern term for it. Kelly, yes, but it was during the first week of service. They were in-site housing. They packed up and departed in the middle of the night. Oh, that is a nightmare. And this is, yeah, we've definitely had situations where in the first week or so, members realize that the experience is not maybe what they were looking for, is not a commitment they were ready to take on, and they get on out of there. And while that's absolutely really unfortunate and difficult to deal with, it's, I'd rather have a member drop out in the first week than 10 months in, for sure. I see Victoria. We had a member travel for a week. They requested time off, but then they left the country for almost 2 months. They showed up after their trip asking for their living allowance. Wow, that is, again, like Samantha was saying earlier, I think that's one of those scenarios that you wouldn't even think to plan for, because who would do that? But these things happen. People make wild decisions sometimes. And all we can do is file that away, learn from it, and make sure you have a policy written for next time. A number of members simply disappeared and we were not able to ever find them. We contacted their emergency contact. This was during COVID. Oh, that's really tough. That would be really stressful and worrying, I can imagine. And hopefully, hopefully everything was okay with that member and they just decided that it wasn't for them. But I mean, like I was saying, it can be really important for you to make sure that people are notified if the member has gone missing, because maybe they just decided to go off site and not show up, but maybe there is something really serious going on that their family or emergency services needs to be aware of. Joy, yeah, that's a bit outrageous. Yeah, crazy things happen. You just have to learn from the experience. Anyone else have anything to share about members going AWOL? We hear we got a couple of different scenarios. Anyone have tips on how to handle it when it does happen? Anything that you've done that seemed to be really effective? I know, once a member goes missing, I guess there's not a ton you can do other than place them in suspension, and take it from there.
I was going to say, in our VISTA program, we had someone go AWOL because could not contact her, email, phone, text, nothing. And I think in that moment, I learned very quickly that it was really important to have an emergency contact. Eventually, she did, texts us back, and we're working with her to use her leave and getting emergency days. But there have been times, even over the last month, she ends in a month, where she's just not contacting us. And I just don't know if like that's her breaking point, but we, moving forward, we're going to implement a policy to get everyone's emergency contact. Just so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that can easily fall through the cracks because, it's not very often you should get in touch with an emergency contact. And I think it's really easy to be like, this is maybe a little silly. This is, a box on the paperwork that maybe we don't need. But, once you're in a situation when you need it, you're going to be really glad that you have it for sure. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, sure. And that your emergency contacts are something that I don't think all commissions do that with their programs. And we're so glad that we do that in Virginia, because I always tell them, try to contact their emergency contact. And let's segue into emergency, actually. The slide. Yeah. The next slide.
Do you not see it?
No,
Oh,
it's
no.
not
Course not,
progressing
of course
again.
not.
Oh, Teams just can't get it together today.
I think it might be my internet, but
Yeah.
you see it?
Yep, we have it now.
Yep, there it is.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, things happen. And I know some programs probably have these things happen to where members tell you that they're ill or something like that, and it won't be the last. So it's best to prepare yourself for something like this. So this scenario is a member comes to you and tells you that their mother is ill and they will need to end their service to go take care of her. So are there any options besides ending their service? Will they qualify for a compelling personal circumstance exit? Will they be eligible to serve again? Do you have short-term emergency leave options? Okay. So one of the things is that one of the things that you could do is definitely coach them, talk to the member about why they first joined the service, and if they really try to talk through things with them. And I think that's why it's always good to do those one-on-one check-ins, even to take a temperature of an AmeriCorps member just to see how things are going, because that's one of those good things that you would like to you should do just in case. It doesn't have to be anything going on, but always catching up with the member and asking them how things are and checking in on them. That's a good thing to do. Will they qualify for CPC, which is the compelling personal circumstance? Well, it depends. If this is something where the mother is deathly ill, or they're thinking that the mother may not have weeks left, something that is very personal that could lead them to get a CPC. However, they have to do enough service hours to get the CPC, and also all the documentation, all that information has to be communicated through the AmeriCorps member to the program director or program staff. Will they be eligible to serve again if they've left? It depends on if they are in service and they're serving satisfactorily. That I don't see that there will be a problem for them serving again. And do you have short-term emergency leave options? Now, you can always have in your policies and procedures the internal policies that you have based on your program design. There's no one program alike, so you have to base it off of internal policies, what's going on. And if that person leaving has a specific role, which would impede on the other AmeriCorps members. I think we, had that little scenario before where we think that's going to have give a whole weight of other work and duties for another AmeriCorps member because this member can't be there. So that's some case cases like that. And I want to just ask someone in the chat if they could put in, because I know this has happened a couple of times with some programs, and how you've dealt with this and if this has happened to you before. I'll see. This is Victoria. Suspension, we tell members we need to know before or when they need to pause to suspend them, not just after not showing up for a couple of weeks. Yes, yes, yes. And then you would also do this during orientation. You have to always refresh an AmeriCorps member's mind on things that you covered in orientation, because they will forget. But I think it's always good to handle things, be proactive in these scenarios, and even give these scenarios to them during orientation. Anyone else? Okay, Kelly. Anything like this, we share information on the CPC exit, regular exit, etc. We present all the options to them and the requirements of the options and let the member decide how to proceed. Oh yeah, oh, that's good, that's good. And is that something that you do every year, Kelly? It sounds like so. Yes, good, 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 good. Anyone else?
Something I'll just put in a plug for is making sure that you always have this information drawn up at hand in a really easy format. If a member is going through something like this, that's really, really scary, really traumatic, they probably don't want to have to like sift through a handbook trying to pull out the information. So having like a really simple explanation of their options and what they can do when a member comes to you with a situation like this can be really important, because as important as it is for members to be familiar with the handbook and to be able to sift through that information, when an emergency is happening, they don't necessarily have the bandwidth to do that. So definitely making sure that you're a partner to your members when crises happen, and that you make the process as easy as possible for them is really important.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Just also, we have a CPC policy. So if you need to exit a member of CPC, ask your program officer for the policy. It has a checklist of what you'll need to actually document their exit. But it's also on Basecamp. Or should be.
And we use the program change request form for that.
Program change request form. Did it change to above and beyond? Of course not.
It did not, no, sorry.
That's all right. I'm gonna have you after this, if you want to maybe share your screen after
Yeah,
I do
absolutely.
this.
I can do that.
Okay, great. So above and beyond benefits. So we're coming out of COVID and people are looking for employment, and we understand that recruitment is difficult this time. The minimum wage is increasing, and your program is finding it harder and harder to recruit individuals who are going to commit to a term of service for those minimal benefits that AmeriCorps provides. So you have multiple subsites at your organization. You have 2 types of member slots available. Let's say you have full-time and minimum time, or any variation of thereof. A couple of your sites have inquired about providing a housing or travel benefit to their members. And these are some things you need to think about. Yes, you can provide benefits above and beyond what AmeriCorps provides to your members. My first question is, are you able to raise the living allowance? You have the opportunity to do so every year, right? Because you as the organization are creating your budget. There's a cost per MSY that you're allowed to apply for, but then, based on whatever match you have available, you make the living allowance what you need it to be. I think all of our programs right now are, I believe all the full-time are above 20,000, so that's great. I believe every position in the portfolio is paying at least very close to $11 per hour. So I think as a portfolio in Virginia, we're moving in the right direction, and we're doing it, collectively or on your own, which is great. I love that. Are you flexible in types of slots that you offer? Based on the slot type, basing the slot type on the member that you are recruiting is not always wise, because if they are choosing their own slot type, I just worry about their commitment, and based on what you need, that might not be the best idea. But, and we didn't talk about this year, we talked about it last year, about converting slots. It's always an option to you if it makes sense and if it's strategic. There's a couple programs that they almost doubled their slots, and that means you double the number of individuals you have to recruit. Or you double the number of slots that you like are leaving on the table just to get a couple of slots that you wanted. And it's like, that's just not good practice, because there's a whole bunch of different implications in doing that. But if that's something you want to talk about because you're just finding that you're not recruiting the right people, or based on your economic situation in your county, maybe half-time slots are more attractive than full-time slots, talk about that with your program officer. So equitable benefits among core members. So not all sites have to offer the same benefit, but a site should offer the benefits to all the members that serve there. So site A and site B, one can offer a housing benefit, and then site B can offer a transportation benefit. But site A can't just offer that housing benefit to member one. They have to offer it to member 1, 2, and 3. So it has to be equitable. You can't just say, hey, this member has a situation and we're just only going to offer that benefit to them. That's just not how it works. So, and because different sites have different, different scenario. I mean, if you're working with a housing organization and they have a housing available based on whatever, business they do, that's awesome. If you are working with the Department of Public Transportation and they want to give all their members bus passes, right on. But it can't just be for one member. It needs to be for every member serving at that site. So what's the policy? If the program will offer any additional benefit, regardless of the service site, you have to have a policy. Usually there's different scenarios, and if this is happening at your organization, talk to your program officer about it. So have you thought about all the nuances to protect your organization to mitigate risk? That's really what's happening, right? So if you're giving one person something, because it can happen at different levels. It can happen at your organizational level, like the sub-grantee level, where you're giving all of your AmeriCorps members this benefit, or it can happen at the site level where they're giving all the members who are serving at their site this benefit. So if it's happening at the organizational level, you need to have a policy, and I really recommend that you run it through your program officer, just because we're thinking about all these different things that might mitigate risk. And just there's just so many things that happen. I mean, we're going through this presentation. There's just so many things that happen that we don't even think of. And obviously something might happen and then we have to create a policy for it, which is fine, and we can do that. But you're allowed to give benefits above and beyond the living allowance. So I would think about that, what your organization has to offer. Professional development counts too. So just thinking about that. Anybody, I think people give or have benefits that they offer their members. Doesn't Danville, don't you guys have like a restaurant program, or was that an alumni program? Are they on here?
What was
Yeah,
that?
that was our mentorship program where we offer benefits to alumni, different incentives in the community. But we do offer mileage reimbursement, but the members have to have a certain policy.
Yeah, love that. Mileage, love that. I will say, I was thinking about mitigating risk. We had a program, not in State National, but they were, Sasha's smiling, they were offering a member, they were one of our sites, our sub-sites. They were offering member housing. They were paying their rent essentially. And then they found out that the member wasn't actually living there. And they were like, why are we paying that member's rent? And it's like, well, what's your policy? And they're like, we don't have one. It's like, well, what do you want to do in this scenario? I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sasha.
Yeah, I was just gonna say it was pretty wild. I think the situation was that the member had a conflict with their roommate, and they weren't able to get out of their lease, so they had the site paying the rent on the apartment they shared with that roommate, and then they were living elsewhere. And it's like, this stipend, even though they didn't necessarily have it in writing, the spirit of it was to help the member afford basic necessities, not to subsidize a roommate disagreement. So it's one of those scenarios that I think, again, you don't think that's going to happen. It's not something you would necessarily dream up when you're trying to write a policy and trying to offer these benefits. But it's just another thing to tell you that you need to think of every scenario possible. And when these things come up, all you can do is tweak your policy to accommodate it and then carry on.
Yeah, exactly right. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. You want to share yours?
I have a question. This is Annie. Specifically about the fiscal responsibility for adding these additional benefits. I assume we can't, hypothetically, I'm just like, if we were to offer an additional, we do offer mileage reimbursement, but for some reason, if we were to offer a piece above and beyond that, how do we report that? Are we obligated to report that on the fiscal side, or is that something that we're saying we're pulling from other coffers to pay for if we didn't already get it approved for the grant?
Yeah, that second one. So there's on the GPR, I think it has like leverage benefits or leverage resources. You could put it in there if you're using your own like institutional dollars, but if it's not approved on your budget, we wouldn't expect you to report it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else on benefits before we carry on? Everyone good? Okay. And can you all see my screen all right? Yes, fantastic. So next we have a nice long scenario for this one. Conflict between members. So the scenario we're going to be working with is there are 3 members assigned to a school service site this program year. One of the members is a returning member and 2 are brand new. It's 1 month into the program year, and the returning member and one of the new members are not getting along. It's gotten to a point where the other member is calling out of service because it's causing her distress to be in the middle of this conflict all the time. The site supervisor calls you, the program director, and is concerned after she heard the 2 members that don't get along exchange rude words in the hallway. So obviously this is something that is spilling out of, a personal conflict into the workplace. And causing problems both with professionalism and with their work. Did the slide change all right? Okay. So let's think about how we can handle this. And while I'm going through this, again, everyone go ahead and put in the chat. Have you dealt with member conflict and how did you manage it? What strategies do you have available? What tools do you have available? What tips do you have for everyone else? So here is what I would recommend in this situation. First, you're going to start with fact finding. Figure out exactly what is going on here. Is it kind of a mutual conflict where these 2 individuals just do not get along, just, mutually do not particularly like each other? Is it a situation where it seems like one member is kind of the aggressor? Is it, kind of a bullying situation? What exactly is happening here? And what you need to take into consideration. You're also, of course, going to want to talk to their supervisor or maybe other site staff who work with them to get a more impartial view of what is going on. And you're going to want to collect any reports or documentation, if there have been maybe emails exchanged about issues or any reports that have been written up by your site supervisor. That's all going to be really important to collect to get a really strong overview of what is going on here. Once you've done this kind of fact finding, you're going to want to think about who is taking the lead on this. Is this something that you feel that your site staff are capable of handling and you just need to kind of support from the background? Or does your team need to get involved? Is there a member of your team who is, it's appropriate to have involved? Is there someone who meets with all of these members, works with all of these members, and is going to be able to be kind of a neutral support for everyone involved to work towards a conclusion? You're going to want to consider the tools that are available to you, going from kind of least to most serious. The first step always is going to be coaching and training. You're going to want to talk with these members about conflict resolution, maybe do some sessions for them to voice any concerns they have if they're just not working well together. And you're going to want to train them on how to, get through a work environment where maybe your coworkers are not people you get along with, because that's going to happen throughout their work careers. That's something that, is probably going to arise again again at some point. And this can be a really great opportunity for some professional development and to help them build resiliency for the next time something like this happens. If that coaching and training isn't getting you anywhere, then the next thing you could think about is reassignment. Would it be appropriate to take one of these members and reassign them to a different site so that their service isn't necessarily being disrupted, but so that you can break up the situation that just isn't working and give them both a chance to thrive in a new environment. In the spirit of equity, it might even be appropriate to reassign both of them if you don't want it to look like one member is being favored or like, someone is being punished while the other isn't. The next thing you can think about is suspension. If the conflict is reaching a point where, again, it seems like there is some bullying or unfair treatment involved from one member or the other, or if it is reaching a point where it's really affecting their professionalism and their quality of work, then you can think about a suspension and giving the members some time away to regroup, to think about the situation, and to hopefully come back ready to get back to work and handle things a little bit better. And then finally, the last thing that is going to be available to you, of course, is early exit. Depending on the situation, some members might choose this. They might feel that, it's a work environment that they just can't thrive in, and they need to step away for their own health. Or, again, depending on the situation, it might be a situation where you need to ask a member to exit if it just seems like they really aren't able to work with others or able to maintain professionalism in the workplace. And then the number one thing, the really key to this situation, excuse me, is going to be to make a plan. Like we were saying earlier, you're going to want to sit down with everyone involved. So it's going to be your program staff, your site staff, the members. You're going to want to put together a plan for specific actions, whether that's coaching, whether that's reassignment, and you're going to make a plan for how long you're going to wait for results. Is the coaching going to be over the period of a week, a month? Once the coaching is concluded, how long are you going to give the members to resolve the situation? If you cross the 2-month threshold and you're still having issues, then it's probably time to escalate, or, just depending on the situation, maybe it's 2 weeks, maybe it's a month. Whatever you all decide is appropriate for the situation and for the members involved. So let's go over to the chat and see. Oh, I didn't mean to hide the PowerPoint. There we go. Let's go to the chat and see what else is going on. Yes, Dana, try to separate behavior/actions from personality for documentation if possible. It can be definitely really challenging to have a conflict where it maybe doesn't seem like either member is actually doing anything wrong. They just have a personality clash. That can be really challenging. That's a situation that we dealt with when I was working with Vista. And it can be hard to deal with because there isn't, necessarily specific actions that you can target or take disciplinary action on. It's just a case of people who are not really designed to work together. So yes, when you're doing reporting, when you're thinking about disciplinary action, it's really important to make sure that you are focusing on specific behavior, specific actions, things that are really documentable, and not just, maybe this person has a strong personality, or whatever the case may be. Let's see if there's anything else in the chat. Anyone else? Have you dealt with member conflicts? How do you resolve these? Audia, we've experienced member site supervisor conflicts. Oh, this is a great point. Dana does a really good job to schedule in-person or Zoom meetings to resolve issues and reduce challenges. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's not just between members that you could have conflict. Sometimes site supervisors can have a hard time working with their members as well. This is definitely one place where I think it could be really important to have the site supervisor involved in the interview process if you don't already. Of course, you don't necessarily want them to have full veto power, but I think having the site supervisor have a say in who they're going to be working with is going to be really important. So you can make sure that both the site supervisor and the members, and also that all of the members are going to be working together cohesively. It's important to be thinking, from the interview stage about how you're going to build that team. and how they're all going to mesh together. And yeah, just having that like third party person, maybe a program staff member to act as a neutral mediator, and help manage the situation can be really important, because once you have a conflict already building up, it can be hard to let the supervisor handle it on their own, just because they're already so deep in it. Anyone else have anything on member conflict or member supervisor conflict? Okay. I am going to go ahead and carry on then.
Okay, I think it's me. Is there room for compromise? And I know that most of these scenarios that some of you have, seasoned programs have dealt with. This is I can't do it. It's the start of the program year. Everyone has signed their contracts. Um, Contracts been enrolled, showed up for their first day of service to their service sites, even completed their first bi-weekly timesheets. And so it seems like everything is smooth sailing. A member comes to you and says he thinks he made a mistake. The hours are too many per week, and he has personal issues, undisclosed. He really wants to stay in service, but he's not sure he can fully commit to the 35 to 40 hours per week for another 10 months. How do we handle this scenario? So again, I know that we talk about coaching and training, because part of program management is also doing some of that to help people get through, especially AmeriCorps members, get through really kind of going deeper into why they signed up in the first place. You know, trying to just pinpoint, maybe they don't really understand what this is all about. A lot of times AmeriCorps members come in and they're excited to sign up about something, and they start getting into the training and they start, getting into the weeds of everything. They might see that MSA and see that it's an agreement and that they have to commit. And that might be something that they didn't think they were going to enter into, that commitment, the time. Maybe they also have something else going on. You know, that's why it's always good to kind of screen folks to see if there's something that they have that that's pending, that or ask that question, is there anything that would keep you from committing to something like this? Because we really, the type of, for example, if it's education and you're serving students, we really need your tutors to be there and be present for these students, because it's very important that we have folks that commit. So it's always good to be upfront with AmeriCorps members, definitely explaining what they're going to do, what this entails, because maybe that's something that they missed. They're just signing up and they just didn't know what this was. That could be one thing. And also talk about how AmeriCorps is going to build on their skills. And in our Life After AmeriCorps, how this will you look good on resumes, just different things to see if you could kind of, dig in more and dig in deeper to what's really going on with this member. Another thing is, if that's not working and they still think that this is not going to work, our policy is here at the commission is that if this is done early within the first 90 days of their service, there's a possibility for a slot change. But of course, then there's still not a guarantee. So you would go to your PO to ask if it's possible, if this is something that you're contemplating with an AmeriCorps member that you think may not work out. And then also there's times when they just are not going to work. It's not going to work for them. They've made the decision to exit. And then you can unfortunately do a CPC, depending on what, again, like the other scenario, a CPC, or if it's not something that could be or fall under a CPC, then an early exit, unfortunately, would have to be done. But there's, those are a couple of things that, or either, I know suspension has come up to a lot, but we always try to talk to the member just to see, especially if they're new members, and they haven't done this before, just to see what's really going on. Kind of try to talk them out of it, if you will. So does anyone have any examples for us, real life examples of how they've handled a situation like this? If you can put that in the chat, or even bring yourself off of mute. Okay. Okay. All right. So next slide then. We're just going to move on. So this slide is with grievances. And so um, a lot of things could happen to bring on a grievance. This scenario is a member has been reprimanded for not showing up to service twice. They have been they've been given a verbal warning. You decide to suspend this member and ultimately decide to exit them. The member disagrees with the decision, and they have reasons for being late and showing up. And maybe this has happened to you, that they say they have a reason. And they have determined to file a grievance, which members have a right to file a grievance. And there's a process, of course, to go through that. Here are some of the steps just to ensure that you've covered this. Here we're going back into members coming on, members in orientation. Was the member given a copy of this grievance policy? And that would occur during the training for orientation training. Do you know what your grievance policy is and says? So that goes to our talking about the governing docs the other day, and making sure that you're going through everything that you're giving your member and that you fully understand it yourself, even if you don't understand everything, so that you can explain to them and try to help them through it. Have you documented everything appropriately? What are your next steps? So, this is these types of things are kind of very stressful. Um, we have had situations where members want to grieve against their supervisors at their sites or their program director. So it's not really an easy thing. But of course, everyone comes to us, they're definitely looking for answers. And so we definitely tell the members, yes, you can come to us, but you have to be in communication with your program sites. Again, this is such very stressful situation. We also, again, what comes into play is your internal policies, maybe coaching and talking with the member, trying to really find out uh, what it is and why they feel that they should have been reprimanded, but then share with them the policies that you have. Go over there and cover the policies, and let them know that we stressed this during orientation, which we hope that you did, because sometimes we forget to do those things, and we have to kind of like eat crow and say, no, we didn't cover that. But this is definitely the policy. But I wanted to ask anyone, because I don't know if any of y'all have had a case where you had a member grieve before. You can put that in the chat or come off mute.
So we tell members at their orientation, you know, when we go over the grievance policy, which we have in the handbook, in their contract, like multiple on a Google Drive, multiple places where they can access, and we go through it and we say, if something happens, you know, we go through this to be fair and equitable to everybody. We're going to follow the policy step by step. That's the only thing you can do at that point, really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And and y'all are going over this during the orientation as well, Dana? Yeah. And then your check-ins and things like that with your members. Anyone else have any comments though?
Just real quick, so the grievance policy has to be part of your MSA, right?
Mhm.
We don't, at the commission right now, we don't look to approve it. There's different nuances when it comes to grievance policies potentially. A grievance is a timed approach. It has to happen within a year usually. And then there's, 45 days, 60 days to make decisions, get an arbiter,
Arbiter,
anyway, there's different steps. And so just making sure that your members know and read it and understand what it is. And they can also go to the OIG website and do a report if they want to. But I just want to make sure that everyone knows it has to be with your MSA.
We actually have a thing that they sign at orientation saying that they've received the grievance procedures as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Ready to carry on?
Keep moving.
There we go.
This is out of control. How did we get here? So insert random member issue here. There are so many things that we didn't even cover today that like I've seen with Vista, I've seen in my own, when I was a program director that, I've talked with Sasha, talked with Kim about just historically, it's like, where did this issue even come from? Like, I just can't even imagine. But I just want to, before I ask folks just to share their like crazy stories. Hopefully, maybe you have one. Hopefully not. Maybe, I don't know. But things happen, right? The sooner we realize and recognize that every cohort of members and every year of service is different, the sooner that we can think ahead and mitigate our risks. So what are your policies? I know we always go back to that and everyone's always confused about like, what policies do I need to have? So hopefully we'll be more prescriptive this year about what a policy can look like, what it should look like, how it helps you, how it helps a member, etc. So do you have a policy for this instance or do you have to create one? I understand, I know we all do, that you don't have a policy for everything. And so usually this is how rules are made, right? Someone does something where you're like, what? And then you have to make a rule. So we understand you might not have all the policies, but let's work together this year to make sure that we tighten up what we do have and get what we need. So how do you document things that happen? Screenshots, paper files, just document things, emails. We recently went, this is so silly, but went from Gmail to Outlook and now I can't find anything. And it's like, I wish I would have saved more emails when we had Gmail because now everything's like hidden and I need to document certain things. And it's just like, it's taking more of my time. So it's like, I just should document things exactly when they happen, and then I'll just be in a better place to, make a case for something. Have you contacted your program officer and kept them in the loop? Ask them for resources or tools and come to a solution. Your program officer, can't stress this enough, is your first point of contact. Your program officer and I meet weekly or bi-weekly, depending on the situation. We have AmeriCorps team meetings. So we're constantly in communication. So if there's any issues that are just too big for one person to handle, recognize that there's a team behind your program officer as well, including Kathy. Constantly I'm going to Kathy and I'm like, what? I don't know what to do. And so, just letting us know, keep us in the loop. We are going to probably edit the PCR this year to have notifications versus requests because last year I believe I said, and it's in the instructions. If your members leave for cause, there's only 2 reasons, right? For cause or compelling personal circumstance, or they finish their term. If anyone leaves, we want to be notified and we want to know why. Because number one, I have to answer at the end of the year for why our retention rates are the way that they are. And so if we're notified that all of our members, let's say we're at a 84% retention rate, which is, it has to be 85, right, for CNCS. They're like, why is it so low? Well, literally everybody, I have it documented that everyone left for a better paying job. It's like, well, that's evidence that something else is at play here, right? Or if we get notified that all of your members left in the first week, it's like, what's happening here? There's obviously a trend there. Lastly, if your members are leaving halfway, there's just like, there's trends that you start to see. And then we can ask the right questions. So there are some times where you need to notify us. Like we're not going to approve every single member that leaves for cause. Like we can't stop them from leaving, but we want to be notified. This is a give and take partnership, and hopefully we just want to stay informed. So now let me ask someone to come off me. I'm not going to call off names, but I want to hear something where you're like, what? Like this member issue came out of nowhere. And then if you did or didn't solve it, that's fine. But anybody have something that we have or haven't covered? Oh, I see Audia smiling and laughing. It's just helpful if we should. Oh, go ahead.
What is it? What is it?
Is she typing?
She is. She's typing to me because I told her she should pipe in, because we've seen, some things over the years that, you don't know what you don't know. And in future, we change policies. You try to think of things that might happen, but you can't expect it all. I mean, from members having, not plural, but having to be removed by police from sites.
That's crazy.
That you never would have expected, and it's always from the ones you don't expect it from. It seems. So we laugh when we have like a phenomenal candidate. We're like, oh no, what's going to happen this year? Because it's the ones you don't expect it from, that things pop up from sometimes.
That's a good one. That's insane. Like I don't even know. I would have to pause and be like, what do you do in that scenario? Susan at NSU planning grant, but great point. Sexual harassment and or establishing a relationship between member and supervisor. Yeah, that's not okay. That is bad. What about literacy lab? Andrew, you got any?
Our biggest ones this year were really around health and mental health. So
Yep.
there were definitely a few crisis situations, and I think one, we're really lucky that we have someone on our team who is a mental health professional, not as a part of her role here, but just in general. And so she's really connected with local resources. But I think that'll be something that we'll save and always have on hand now, is like when you get a call from someone or a text from someone that they're experiencing a crisis, having like local resources to point them to immediately has been really helpful.
Yeah, that has been something that's been happening on our Vista team most recently. And it didn't even cross my mind, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's something we have to also put in place here. That's great. What about IRC? I see Katie's on here. What about Christy? I know, Christy, you have a story or two.
We've had a pretty good year this year. Most of ours has been just core members getting along and conflict there. But like last year, we would show up and we get an email and someone goes, "I'm not coming back." And you're like, "What?" So that was fun. But yeah, so most of ours this year has been interpersonal issues, and you guys spoke about that earlier. Our program teams did a pretty good job of working with parties and just kind of having like mediations and then strategies on, how to move forward and work together.
That's great. I remember when I worked at the city of Raleigh, we took crucial conversations. I really like that, just giving people tools they need to manage their own conflict. That's great. What about DCR? And then I'll stop calling on people.
Yeah, I don't know. So I think our biggest issues come up sort of outside the service, whether members are living together or not, or in sort of site provided housing when they're on their personal time. I think the biggest thing that we've always come up with is a lot of time with our training and stuff, we just, as a flat rule, say the expectation is that any training event is alcohol free in regards to, well, I mean, obviously we aren't going to be providing any type of alcohol during training event, but like if people are camping or something on their own personal time, we say you can't do this while you were here as part of, I mean, we can't control whether or not they go to a bar or something like that and they're off time, non-serving, out of uniform, like think of any specific thing, but yeah. We always try and stress those types of things, and sometimes that can be what gets people in trouble.
Yeah. I remember I was at Vista and gosh, it was just so much fun. It was so much fun. But you're meeting people and you're in social situations and this is like your world for, however long your term is. And interpersonal relationships happen, conflict happens, you have to work together or serve together, excuse me. So it's just like, yeah, people are people.
Yeah, or else people start to date and then they break up during their
Sure.
service term.
It's real life,
so,
man.
Yeah.
Who's someone writing in the comments? Oh, Michelle, CCPS, Carroll County. I had 2 members with very strong personalities and leadership desire that had conflicts more than a few times. We had to sit down and finally got it resolved enough that they could finish the year. One did threaten to quit. Yeah, that'll happen too, right? Like, okay, bye. That's great. That's great, Michelle. That's awesome that you guys, I mean, everybody on here is like, we were able to sit down with them. We were able to, hash it out. That doesn't always happen. So, Katie, I think you said you walked away. What about any member issues or trends or things you've seen? Horror stories?
Yeah. I think one thing that we have experienced quite a bit has been conflicts between staff members and AmeriCorps members. Like even just yesterday,
yeah.
I had to have a meeting between a staff member and an AmeriCorps member. And it's one of those things that like, when it comes, like I try and talk through members through it, especially because a lot of our members are relatively inexperienced in a professional setting like that IRC provides. And so talking through that, and it's usually their first time with conflict, and it can be super frustrating for the staff member because the professionalism isn't necessarily where they're used to it being. So when those situations come up, it's really like case by case basis, but like having a meeting, talking it through. It usually involves the AmeriCorps like site supervisor and me, plus whoever is having the issue, but it comes up at least once a year.
Yeah, we've had that in our Vista program. We're just like, and it's hard. It's uncomfortable, and if you don't know what you're doing, hopefully someone on your staff does. So, or you work together and come up with a plan of action where you want to go and what the best resolution at the end would be. So that's great.
Yeah. We had a similar situation like that this year. Well, it's kind of ongoing where someone who works at a site doesn't get along with one of the members, and they reported all this stuff that they are alleging the member had done and everything. And the site reached out about potentially removing the member or doing other things. And so I met with the member and the other person and like sort of investigated everything, and ultimately it boiled down to just the member and this other person didn't get along. But like I had to tell the site, the member's not doing anything that would justify us doing any type of intervention or anything like that. Like, this is an issue between this staff person who you're supervising and them not liking how the member does stuff, but the member's not doing anything like wrong. And so kind of had to put it back on the site, and like they talked to everyone as a group about professionalism and expectations or things like that. And it was just telling the site, if the member does X, Y, or Z, or this happens, or it escalates, or they do something else, like then it may be appropriate for us to be involved as the AmeriCorps program staff. But right now, it's your staff person who has the issue with our member as opposed to the member being the issue.
Personalities clash, right? And not everybody can be friends, but we have to work together. So I appreciate you speaking up, Kelly. Thank you. I'm going to pass it back to Sasha. Yes?
Yep, absolutely. And I will go ahead and close us out. So, what can I do to make sure I am not caught off guard? Like Sam was saying earlier, you are never going to dream up every single scenario that could happen. Wild things happen, people make wild decisions, and you're never going to be able to plan for every single situation. So, what can you do to make sure that you are not caught off guard and that you have a plan for when these wild situations arise? Think ahead. It is worth it to sit down, when you're starting a new program, maybe you're starting a benefits program, maybe you're, bringing in a new site, whether, maybe you're rearranging your member structure. It's worth having a session to just sit down and think ahead. Think about, what is the wildest thing that I think could happen in this situation, and what can I do to mitigate the chances of it happening and to manage it when it does arise. Um, I am a real believer in always plan for the worst case scenario and then be really glad when it doesn't happen. So that's something that you can absolutely incorporate into your program. Try to always have a plan. Document everything. As soon as you hear, the littlest whisper that there might be a situation arising, you want to start documenting, because you never want to get into the situation where you have a crisis on your hands, you have, a real mess, and you don't have documentation of the preceding events. This is especially important when you're talking about things like conflict or member grievances, where it's really important to have that backlog of everything that has led up to the disaster or the crisis. Communicate with members, site supervisors, and the commission. Again, we are all on the same team, hopefully most of the time, and we want to make sure that we are all working towards the same goal. So make sure that your members, your site supervisors, are aware of your policies, are aware of your priorities, and that they are really working in collaboration with you to keep things running smoothly. And of course, as we've said throughout this presentation, always make sure that you are keeping your commission points of contact, your program officer, the fiscal officer, whoever needs to be involved. Make sure that you're keeping them updated so that we know what's going on if it becomes a situation where we need to step in and help. Ensure that you have the policies you need and that you follow them. Having a policy is just the first step. If people aren't educated about it, if they aren't aware of it, if they aren't following that policy, it's almost useless. So you want to make sure that you have all of the policies that you need, that you follow them, and then also that you update them as things happen, as scenarios arise. I know it can be really tempting to kind of, once you've resolved the situation, close the book, walk away, and not think about it again. But it's really important to sit down with those wild situations and think about what are the policies that we could have in place that would have either prevented this or at least made it easier to handle once the situation arose. Make sure your staff is trained and informed. Again, make sure they're aware of all of your policies and make sure that they know how to handle these conflicts and these problems when they arise. And make sure that they know who to turn to if there's a situation that they don't feel like they can handle on their own. Maintain good site management. As we've moved through this presentation, we have heard from quite a few people about either conflicts at their sites or, situations where their site supervisors were maybe being more part of the problem than part of the solution. You always want your site staff, your site supervisors to be part of the solution, to be your partners as you are working to run this program and keep things running smoothly. So make sure that you are training your site staff really well, that you are maintaining open lines of communication with them, and that you have good relationships with your sites. That's going to make everything so much easier. Learn from previous situations. Again, as I was saying, make sure that once you have resolved a situation, that you don't just close the book and walk away, but that you really take time to intentionally bring everyone together and think about how could we have avoided this? How could we prevent it in the future? And what policies do we need to make it easier to manage if it does happen again? And then the last thing, we're all people, again, you are not going to think of everything. There are going to be times when you make the wrong call, or when you, don't catch a situation kind of as soon as it arises. And that is really tough, but give yourself a break. All we can do is learn from it and move forward. Thank you all for joining us for this session on site management. I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. Actually, I see in the chat, Dana, policies are a pain to develop, however, are very helpful when documenting things and referencing page XXY. Yes, absolutely. Totally get, policies can be hard to sit down and write, to get all the language right, to, try to encapsulate everything that you're trying to include in that policy. But having the policy is so, so important for everyone involved. Okay. Thank you, everyone.